Welcome to Wake Up with Ashland. It's good to be with you again. My name is Eric Brooks. I am the curator here at Ashland, the Henry Clay Estate. I'm always glad to have this opportunity to share some of our collection and tell some of the stories that we have here at Ashland. We have in our collection about 4,000 items. Those items include objects, three-dimensional things, manuscripts, papers, photographs, and books. So that's a pretty decent sized collection. It's not near as big as some. I mean, we don't have the 100 million items or whatever that the Smithsonian has, for sure. But it's not a bad collection for a historic house like ours. And the majority of that collection, I would guess probably 85% of our collection or something, is out on exhibit at any one time, which is not typical. If you went to the Smithsonian, you would see at any given time between, say, 1 and 5% of their collection. But in a historic house setting, we interpret the rooms as period furnished rooms. And so that requires stuff. There are some items that serve more as filler, as ways to make the room look interesting, and that we don't talk about except for opportunities like this. So I call these hidden in plain sight. And there are some fantastic stories and really interesting items that we have like that. So everything you're going to see today is on exhibit somewhere out where people can see it. I may do this again with storage because I've got a whole lot of stuff in storage that's really amazing as well. But today, everything you're seeing, you can see if you take a tour. So we're going to start here. Now this piece, there are a whole lot of things going on with this. This is a photograph of Henry Clay. This photograph was taken somewhere close to the end of his life, probably between 1845 and 52. Henry Clay was one of the first people to be heavily photographed. Photography came into existence in the early 1830s with a process created by a man named Daguerre, a Frenchman. The daguerreotype became the first widely available, commercially successful phototype. It required professional training and equipment, so it wasn't something that most people did at home or whatever. You had to hire someone for that. But it was the most common process in Clay's time. There was a second process called the ambrotype, which also became popular late in Clay's life and shortly after. Those two processes result in an image on either glass or metal. Daguerreotypes are on glass. You can tell a daguerreotype by its shiny reflective surface. I think I did a photograph Wake Up once, and you could probably reference that I had all of those out. Ambrotypes are on metal. They don't have that mirror look. So those are done on metal. They both usually come in leather cases. This picture is, I believe, if I understand the provenance correctly, and it's a little complicated, a copy of a Talbot type. And that was a process invented by a man named Edward Fox Talbot. And the difference here is that it was the first widely successful photo process wherein the photo was developed directly on paper. So this is an image that would have been done of Clay onto paper. Clay never loved his image. He always thought it difficult to capture him. And if you look at his images, no two are alike. So that's very true. I love the photographs. I think it gives you a real sense of the man. It captures a moment in time instantly. So I think they're really interesting. This one certainly is. He's wearing his typical black suit, black cravat, etc. Hair is slightly disheveled. This one was at a daguerreotypist's, and apparently the daguerreotypist wasn't happy with it. He didn't think it finished well. I think it looks pretty good, to be honest about it, but he didn't apparently feel it was too great. Now this particular image was given to the grandson of Henry Clay, a man named Thomas Hart Clay Jr., son of Henry Clay's son, Thomas Hart Clay. And it was given to him by a man named Judge Nicholas Longworth II. Nicholas Longworth II was a Cincinnatian of a very, very wealthy Cincinnati family. Their estate was on Mount Adams. If you know Cincinnati at all, you may know Mount Adams primarily because for many years it was the location of the Rookwood pottery. And in fact, the Nicholas estate, Longworth estate, was called Rookwood. That's where that comes from. And that's where the pottery ended up. So that was their estate. Nicholas Longworth II had a son named Nicholas Longworth III. He became a United States representative and for many years Speaker of the House. His other claim to fame was that he wed Alice Lee Roosevelt, the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt. And their marriage was one of those high society marriages that was constantly in the media. Alice was a well-known figure, someone who was known for being, what is a good word for it? Outspoken, perhaps, ruggedly individual. There was a lot of commentary about her during the time that Theodore Roosevelt was president and about some of the things that she did that seemed to some, at least, somewhat outrageous. Theodore was asked about what he could do about this, and he said, well, I can run the country or I can manage Alice. I cannot do both. And I think that probably tells you a lot about Alice and about Theodore, and that's the way a lot of people perceived her. She was a very interesting individual. So this comes from a very prominent family. One of the neat things about the Clays and their descendants is that they are connected to many of these sorts of people. We have a whole list of U.S. presidents that have visited here, including Theodore Roosevelt, who was a friend of Major Henry Clay McDowell. He visited Ashland. He came to Lexington doing research for a history of the development of the Western U.S., the Western U.S. being whatever was west of the original colonies. So he came here to do research on that. He and the Major became friends. They hunted together out west at some times, and the Major became a member of the Boone and Crockett Club, an organization founded by TR for conservation and for the support of hunters. So this family was very well connected, and this is good evidence of it. I also want to point out the frame. The frame is really important. If you look at the frame, it's got these interesting holes in it. Some would see these as flaws, but these are very important historical elements because this frame is made from floorboards from the original Ashland. In 1852, Clay dies. Shortly after, his son buys the estate, buys the mansion and the outbuildings and this half of the property from his father's estate. And he discovers it to be in such disrepair that he has to tear it down and rebuild. And he takes a lot of heat for that. A lot of people think it's a sacrilege to tear down a site of the sort of significance of the home of Henry Clay, one of the most famous and beloved of American figures. So anyway, he tears it down and he recycles some of the materials. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But he also says that people are coming up here and just helping themselves to whatever they want from these large piles of material that come from the house as it's torn down. And it's very annoying to him that they do this. This is private property. They have no right to this, but that's what they do. So I don't know if these were taken when the house was torn down or if they were saved. And Thomas Hurt Clay Jr. had the frame made, but these are supposed to be floorboards from the original Ashland. In addition to that, we have this piece. This is a box. You can see it's got 3 sections. It's got this molding, keyhole. When opened, it's divided into a series of compartments. Our records identify this as a humidor, and I think that's possible. I don't know that that was its only or regular use, but there appears to be evidence of cigars in there, so I think it may have been used for that at some of the time. And at one point, this was identified as having belonged to Henry Clay, which is possible. But there's a piece of evidence that was found with it that I think says otherwise, and I think this is the more likely source of this artifact. This is a little note, and I'm not sure whose hand this is, but it says, this cigar box was made from a rafter of the original Ashland home of Henry Clay. Now, when James tore down the estate, he made boxes and he made canes from the rafters and other wooden parts of the old house. And he sold those to benefit charity. This was one way he tried to make good the original estate. He tried to salvage his reputation, I guess you would say, through this act. Not that it needed to be salvaged, but I think that was what he was trying to do. And he thought it was a way to do something good for the community. And this may well be one of those boxes. This is an ash box. I think it looks like the kind of thing you would expect to be made from the eaves. So I think that's very, very likely what that is. And that's why it's displayed in the ash bedroom, which is where we have James's bedroom furniture, etc. Now this piece is in the Henry Clay bedroom. And if you just had the black cloth itself with nothing else, you'd probably bin it. It just doesn't look like something worth having. And I always like artifacts that are not inherently or obviously important. When something is important, once you know the story, that to me is what I do is about. I can make something that looks like trash a true treasure by providing the story. In this case, I didn't have to, because the man who owned this piece did it for me. He wrote it down right here. That man's name was Theodore Iuccio. Theodore Iuccio was the son of Wilhelm Iuccio. Wilhelm Iuccio was the music director at Christ Church Episcopal here in Lexington, the church attended by the Clays. He taught Henry Clay's wife Lucretia piano lessons. This is a black piece of cloth that was once part of a much larger piece that was part of the funeral cortege of Henry Clay. And when he dies in Washington, the United States Congress takes it upon itself to prepare his body and funeral cortege for delivering it home. And we actually have a complete receipt of all the things that they purchase and how much they pay to get that done. Things like ice to preserve the body until it can be put in the hermetically sealed iron coffin in which it is placed. But they also buy several pieces of fabric to go into this. So that's where this comes from. So that cortege makes its way around the northeastern United States, eventually arrives in Lexington on July 9, 1852. So it's been traveling since June 29th, so about 10 days. It arrives here, goes to the cemetery the next day. He is buried, put into the receiving vault there, and eventually buried. Once that was done, apparently his minister took the cloth off and cut it up into pieces, or at least cut pieces off of it. And he gave this piece to the son of the music director at the church. Probably at that time a young man. He probably thought that would be a cool souvenir for him to keep of this event that was a seminal event in Lexington history. There are very few events that Lexington has had that were the size of this. The estimated crowd for Clay's funeral is between 30 and 100,000 people. So a remarkable piece, and a piece that was actually part of that cortege. It was there at Clay's funeral. So that's really a neat thing, and that we display with the rest of our death display upstairs in the Henry Clay bedroom. Now we have some items from the study. This is another one that, without the story, is a piece of fairly useless paper. This is a check that Henry Clay drew on his account at the Bank of the United States. It is drawn in the amount of $150, and on the back it says, "Pay to the order of Thomas H. Clay." This is his son. We mentioned him earlier, H. Clay, and it's endorsed by Thomas Hart Clay. So it's a family check. I mean, obviously, that's something. I mean, we all write checks. Most checks are pretty mundane. You're paying the water bill or the cable bill or whatever. So we don't know what this check is written for, at least by looking at the check. That is where the importance comes from. And we find that through a letter that Clay writes where he talks about sending the check. That letter can be found in the published Henry Clay papers. Clay wrote this check and sent it to a friend and colleague in Philadelphia. Thomas Hart Clay had gone to Philadelphia to study law, and Clay had provided him money to pay for his lodging and his food and his books and so on. Well, Thomas fell into dissipation, gambling, drinking, etc., and didn't spend that money the way it was supposed to be spent. So Clay's essentially college-age son or young son is spending the money supposed to be used for his education on all these other things, and the end result is he can't pay his hotel bill. So eventually, the hotelier becomes tired of not being paid and has Thomas Hart Clay Sr. jailed for failing to pay the hotel bill. Clay finds this out. He sends money to get Thomas out of jail and to pay the remaining costs of his education. Fairly short time after that, Thomas is brought back home. Clay says, just pay your bills, use the money, get a train, come back, or at this point it would have been a stage. Get a stage and come back to Lexington. We're done with that. You come home, we'll work it out from here. So it's a neat story that tells us something about the family. Henry Clay is often criticized as a bad father. He was inattentive, absent, didn't spend enough time taking care of his children. And that's an unfair criticism. His children had some issues. Yes, that's a fair statement. But Clay cared a great deal. And you have to understand that Clay is living in a time when rearing of children was something done by women. It was expected that Lucretia would handle that. It's part of what's called the sphere of domesticity. Clay would not have been expected to spend much time directly dealing with the rearing of children. And when they were very young, that's probably the case. And he was gone to Washington a lot. But as they grew up, he became very interested in and concerned about their education and about preparing them for life on their own, etc. He worked very hard to ensure that especially his sons had careers. He created a sort of family corporation with himself as CEO and them as employees, and worked very hard to find things for them to do, vocations for them to pursue. Some more successfully than others, but in general, they all ended up doing some very important things. Remember, this man eventually becomes ambassador of the United States to both Nicaragua and later Honduras. This man does very well for himself, even though he has a little bit of trouble at the beginning, like many young people do. But it's an important reminder of who Clay was as a father and about the family itself. So a really interesting piece that, again, on its surface does not belie the story that is behind it. Now, this piece is, I think, one of the more spectacular pieces in the collection. It is a box inlaid with ivory. Some of this ivory is incredibly small. And I think there are some other materials. I'm not sure what all those materials are. It's a wooden box. You open it up. It's even got inlay on the inside. You can see that. That's spectacularly beautiful. And you can see the inside. And if we turn it over, we have the provenance right on it. It says, presented by S. Simpson, Esquire of Fairfax County, Virginia, to the Honorable Henry Clay of Ashland, Kentucky, June 28, 1849. Now, we don't know who Mr. Simpson was particularly, nor do we know exactly why he presented the box, but clearly it was a gift to Clay from Mr. Simpson. The purpose of this box, we think, was to hold tokens for playing cards or chess or chessmen, that kind of thing. It's a game box. So this would have been something Clay would have sat on a table when he played. And it would have been a very attractive and beautiful piece. It probably would have been a conversation starter amongst Clay and the other gentlemen with whom he played cards. So it's a really spectacular piece in the collection. You can find that in the dressing room. It sits on a table there. This last piece is in Madeline McDowell Breckenridge's room. This piece is of real interest to me because there was one in the collection at Liberty Hall Historic Site in Frankfort where I started before I came to Ashland. And I knew what the piece was, but I didn't know exactly what the date was. This one, I know the date because I know the event with which it is connected. This is connected to one of the most important events in the history of the estate, one of the biggest and most widely attended events, the 1892 wedding. Nanette was married here in the house, and they had a big reception, and they built a pavilion on the back, even brought in electric light for that. It was a huge society event. I want to say about 300 people attended from all over the country. It was one of the biggest society weddings in that era of Kentucky's history. People of all sorts came to that event. This was a wedding gift to Nanette and her husband. And it is a tea set. You see the teapot. It's also got a little burner. It would have a wick and oil, and you light the burner, it heats the teapot, and you can have a cup of tea. But if you look carefully at it, this wrought iron stand is in the shape of the number 5. And if you look carefully, 5 o'clock tea. So that's not just a tea service, that's a 5 o'clock tea service. So that's for your evening tea. And I think that's really cool. That's just a neat piece of design. And we now know it dates to 1892 because it was a wedding gift. So another very interesting piece. What you can see here is that we have a wide-ranging collection that covers a lot of territory and includes some really remarkable pieces, some of which we know everything there is to know about. Others we know very little about. But they're all remarkable. And it's really fortunate for us that we are able to have that collection and to preserve it and to show it to you and others. So I hope you've enjoyed this little tour of some interesting pieces that often aren't discussed in the collection. And I hope you'll come at some point and check them out. As always, if you'd like to know more, if you go to our website, go to our catalog, There's a folder in there for Wake Up with Ashland, and all this stuff is in it. So take a look, and you can read up on them. If you have any questions, obviously let me know. Good morning. Nice to see everyone. Good morning, Katrina. Good morning, David. Thanks for joining us this morning. So as you can see, we have some very interesting things in the collection, and oftentimes the story is not obvious, or is not a story we talk about every time we do a tour. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it's not something we have the time to deal with in every tour. So it's great when we have the opportunity to share that. I always enjoy that. That's always, to me, an exciting opportunity. So I'm pleased to be able to do that with you and do that this morning. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have, if anyone has any questions. The question has been asked about the barometer in the background, and I'll be honest, I meant to cover that. And quite honestly, got rolling and went by it. The barometer in the background belonged to Henry Clay, and it's something that he would have had probably in his study. As a farmer, weather would have been important to him. Knowing things like when he might expect rain, or if it's going to get cold, or if it is cold, make a difference in various activities, planting, harvesting, and so on. And so that was information that was important. That would have been a pretty high-tech scientific instrument. It's got a barometer at the bottom and a thermometer in the skinny part at the top. One instance where we think, or I think, it probably was used is by Henry Clay's son, John. John, more than most of his other sons, took a great interest in farming and was a very successful farmer. He ended up with half of the property bordering Tate's Creek Road and had a house there. There's an Anglican church next to Christ the King Cathedral, and his house stood where the parking lot for that church is today. He wrote a diary from 1864 to 66 that we have, that is in the collections at the University of Kentucky in special collections. And I've been reading it and transcribing it, perhaps at some point in the near future. Well, in the future, I won't say near, because it's something I have to fit in around other things, but I may be able to post that. It's very interesting, a lot of interesting information there. Every entry that he enters, he does an entry every day, and at the end of it, he notes the weather. So he'll put so many degrees Mercury, percent humidity. And I suspect that he was taking the readings off of that instrument. And the reason I suspect it is that that instrument passed through his line of the family. So that would make sense that he's the one using it. So anyway, it's a really neat instrument. We currently display it in the dressing room, which again might be a place you would keep it. Clay's getting ready for the day, helps him determine how to dress. Use that information also to make decisions regarding farm activities. So that's what it is. Morning, Julie. We'll certainly do the storage. I need to start gathering that together. We'll probably do that not too distant future. And if anyone ever has ideas about programs, if there's something you've never known or wondered about or would just like to know more about, I'm happy to entertain that. We would love to be able to address interests of our viewers. So send a Facebook message or post it on our Facebook page, or you can email me at ebrooks@henryclay.org or call me at 859-266-8581, extension 203. I'm happy to take those suggestions, and if I can do it, I'll be pleased to try to do that. A question has been asked about the Clay Corporation, and this is a concept that I've gotten mostly from a historian named Dr. Lindsay Apple. Dr. Apple has been researching the Clay family now for well over 30 years. Started when he was approached by someone he worked with at Georgetown College, where he was a professor of history, who had a friend who was a Clay descendant and had a large collection of papers that she wanted to know more about and to figure out what to do with. So he went through those, and that provided an entree to studying the family. And he wrote a book, which I have here somewhere. I don't know where it is at the moment, but a book about the Clay family. You can buy it in our museum store, which is really a fascinating look at the family. I don't know of very many like it.
It's In the Shadow of a Kentucky Patriarch, I believe, is the title. The Clay Family Legacy, and it's a fascinating read. I highly recommend it. But he talks about this Clay Family Corporation. So Clay centers himself as CEO, and he employs his sons or sets his sons up in all sorts of opportunities. So Thomas is working with him on him. They become partners in this business. They engage in its production, making things out of it, selling it down south, etc. Theodore, before he suffers the issues that get him confined to the what's in a lunatic asylum, practices law and does some farming. James practices law. Clay gets him into politics, helps him get a post as Charge d'Affaires to Portugal, and so on. So John, farming, the farm on the other side, the horse business. Henry Jr., law, politics. He's moving in that general direction before he's killed at Buena Vista. So he's helping his sons find their path in life, find ways to be productive, and be part of this sort of family business where Clay's various business opportunities are being carried forth by his sons. So, again, people talk about Clay as a father. This is a great example of how, as a father, he worked to improve the lives of his sons and to provide them opportunities to have lives of their own. All right, Sue. Sue is my sort of volunteer assistant curator. She's right. I can spend a long time talking about artifacts in storage. We have a lot of them, and there are some really neat things. So we'll do that. That will be an interesting thing to do. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon. I'm sure we'll be back on in a couple of weeks with another exciting episode of Wake Up. So everyone have a great day and a great weekend, and we'll see you shortly.